Students pay me $200 plus for the lesson that I am about to share with you here for free. And I'm really excited to do this because it's a bit different in it rather than me just sharing with one private student and really helping them out. Here I get the chance to actually help a lot of people at once, so I'm really looking forward to sharing the way a typical lesson of mine goes, and I hope that not only will you get a lot of value out of it, but it'll just help you to really determine for yourself whether I'm the sort of right person for you to work with on the next stage of your chess journey. And obviously that's a two-way street. I also want to make sure that you're the right fit as well, and you know that you've got that deep love for chess and have that makes some sort of obsessiveness that I have that comes from my neurodivergence. But with that, let's introduce the what we'll be covering in this lesson today. And also, just to let you know, I have actually included the full PGN file as well. I've included as a lead chess study, which you can find in the link in the description, and that's just going to allow you to review not just the material that we have here, but also a lot of additional material that I prepared for this lesson. I've really prepared in exactly the same way as I would for a private lesson, so it's going to be very authentic, like even at the moment I'm trying to find the right words, so it's not edited, it's just like raw what it would be like in the session. And of course there are some differences, obviously in a private lesson, when I ask you different questions, obviously you take some time to give a reply or for a puzzle to think about the position and figure it out. So it means that even though it's a 1 hour video here, it actually may feel a lot more like a 2 hour lesson in reality when you're thinking about the positions and trying to figure things out for yourself for the puzzles I'll set. But it's also true that, there's that less of that, two-way communication, of course, with a video. So those are going to be the main differences you'll notice. But anything that you don't understand, you can always replay the video, or you can look in the PGN file for some further details. So basically, I'm going to cover this into three main parts. The first part is going to be sort of the direct feedback process, like giving direct feedback on your thought process. Obviously, I can't do this, without someone else being there, so I've just moved my own games when I was rated around 2000-ish to 2150-ish FIDE as kind of the example. Also, in some cases, you'll even see some mistakes that some players rated in the high 200s to low 300s made as well in against me. So you're actually going to kind of learn from both those perspectives, like from my mistakes and from the mistakes of my opponents. And also, the second part is going to be me kind of sharing some really instructive moments I know from some high-level games. I took them from the latest The Week in Chess. And then finally, the third part is going to be me sort of sharing a little bit of that blueprint of how to consistently beat players rated around 200-300 FIDE. I think it's fair to say, if you have Hikaru or Carlsen play against 200-300 rated players 100 times, they're going to win at least 99 times out of 100, meaning that there is a proven formula to be able to do this, and I'm going to share with you a small piece of it. Obviously, in 1 hour, I can't really cover everything, but at least these are the three main things we're going to focus on. And before I get into that, I always ask my students if they have any sort of questions that they want to ask me. If they don't have any questions, I might ask them a question or two, just kind of check in and just sort of see how things are, or maybe just something I'm kind of curious about that came to mind from previous lessons, just to ask on those lines. But in this instance, I actually have come up with a sample question. I think it's one that a lot of players 2000 plus FIDE really struggle with in my experience. And we are going to talk about it here. So the example I've used is I've made the hypothetical question, Max, what do I do against the Catalan? Like the Catalan with either knight f3 here or, of course, with the alternative move order of g3 in this. It's just a really annoying system, and I've tried different things, but I'm not really sure what I should play against it. So, what would be your suggestion here? And the nice thing is that, I'm sort of not going to be playing any tournaments anymore. Like, I was originally going to play, some tournaments, make a big comeback, play a few events. Ended up having, some major family issues, so I wasn't really able to do that as such. But the good news is that it means that, basically, now I can share with you all the preparation I did, because I'm not going to be using it anytime soon. So I can just share it freely and not have to hide any of my secrets for tournaments I'm not going to be playing now. But basically there's this really old cool idea I want to share. So basically, when it comes to the bishop b4 system, I'll be recommending this kind of close Catalan approach with bishop d2 and bishop e7. So basically the idea of this is that having a bishop on d2 kind of reduces their options a bit. Let's say, for example, if you tried to play the close Catalan with something like bishop e7 and, rather than the dc4 main line, you just went for something solid like this, then you are going to kind of notice that white is able to use the d4 square to support the, the attack here. And, of course, the position objectively from a computer point of view is still okay for black, with some DC4 and stuff, but it's clear that white's got a little bit of pressure to work with from the practical level. And so by flicking in bishop b4, we're just going to avoid that problem and just play very solidly. And there's actually a little bit of a move order trick, which actually here kind of gives you two different ways to play on move 3 that I'll kind of share in a moment. But basically the gist of what we'll be going for is that, and I've included a lot of model games in the file, by the way, so you'll be able to play for those in your own time to get a really good feel of the positions. But rather than sort of going for the old main line of like b6 and getting the bishop out, I'm actually suggesting the move of a5 as a little bit of a different approach. Obviously, if the queen's on b3 instead of c2, that's just going to work even better for black. But even if the queen on c2, it's still going to be quite nice. Just playing a little bit of a waiting move where, you know, after rook d1, we can just play the move h6 here. And this actually transposes to a line you could also get via a different move on move 3. But this is kind of the basic setup that we're aiming for. And I think if you look at some of the model games, especially I really like the game between Vignar Stefansson against the Gukesh from the Olympiad 2024. You'll kind of show how Gukesh is kind of able to sort of play solidly, eventually get counterplay on the king side with g5 and win quite a nice game. So you can check that one out in your own time outside the lesson. It's all included in the file. But there is one move order point I do want to touch on. Also, I will add, by the way, Gukesh is really a big expert of these lines. Like, I kind of accidentally misclicked, but this actually is from a very nice win well, I guess from a different game with Kwang, but it was this game that Gukesh has really model win very recently in St. Louis Rapid 2025. They're kind of showing the problems for white if they let you fix the structure in this way. So that's also a really good example I'd recommend, especially that you play for outside the lesson. But there is a bit of a move order point that you should know about, which is that, okay, if they play like knight bd2 here, trying to keep the tension, it is going to be a better version for black. You know, not worried about queen a4 anymore when you've got knight a6, and you can even delay casting if you want to really try and punish the move order. So I did play through all of these games myself before the lesson, so I know that these games are good quality in that sense, and it'll just give you a good feel for how the positions kind of play out from there. Obviously white can get compensation with different versions of like the b3 push, but you are up a pawn and you can defend your one weakness in a pretty natural way as such, and sort of keep the structure fairly stable. A little bit of theme I did notice is that the way in which black was usually winning in these variations was actually find the right moment to return the pawn later. Like often a move like b4, like around move 20 to 25 or such, was kind of a way in which black was freeing the pieces and being able to kind of use the extra pawn and free the bishop. So just a little pattern you'll kind of notice when you play through the games. But the final move order point I do want to mention, well, I guess the penultimate one, is that they can also play the move order with g3 and bishop g2, which does mean that after bishop b4, knight d2, you can't really play dc4 quite as easily. Obviously, dc4, queen a4 is going to be a big problem as such, so do be a bit careful with your move orders there. But you could still play in a somewhat similar spirit with d takes c4. I used to play the b6 line, just kind of play these Queen's Indian type of positions, but they do require a certain art to play, and they can be a little bit practically unpleasant unless you really study them quite a lot. And, well, if you're sort of wanting to play like d5 and not b6, it's a bit inconsistent. Now, it is true that in the past I used to think that this move order was quite good for white because of queen to c2 and being able to get the pawn back, because, one trap you do want to avoid here is that if they go take, knight g5, that you are going to lose at least a piece, because of course knight d5, queen h7, checkmate. So don't do that, but just give back the pawn with c5, and the modern Indians kind of think that these lines of either knight c6 or with c3 are basically going to be fine for black. I did include a couple of model games for white as well, just so you kind of know what white is aiming for, and how you have to be a bit careful sometimes about some of white's short-term initiative. But you do have the better pawn structure and a bit of an imbalance to work with. I think if you check out the game between Bok against Nakamura from the Chess.com Rapid 2022, that'll give a good starting point for your own investigations. You might be wondering, well, Max, why aren't you sort of giving us like deep engine theory and analysis? Why are you focusing more on model games? I do think that when you sort of do a lot of engine analysis, like you'll often end up in a position where it's objectively fine, but where you're not going to really understand your rising positions. And something that Ramesh has kind of mentioned, and I sort of agree with this point, is that openings don't really matter below 2,500 FIDE or so. So it's going to be much more valuable if you do really use the openings as a tool to master middle games and end games like we're doing here in this example of this file. Also, a nice advantage of the system I'm recommending is you could also play it via the h6 move order, which is a little bit of a weapon that the Indian school of chess has been using a lot lately, players like Gukesh and also many others. And the idea is if knight c3, you can kind of transition to a sort of low theory Nimzo Indian, where they commit to knight f3. H6 is not the most useless move. It does stop, bishop g5. You can see, for example, a game between Abasov Gukesh, which, the game is annotated in Mega Database, but out of respect for the chess-based copyright, I have just included the game annotations. But if you do have Mega, and honestly, you should really have Mega Database if you're rated 2000 plus FIDE, you can get in the sale in November, when a new one's released each year. Well, then that'll give you like a really good understanding of how these sort of positions play out. Why this h6 move is kind of useful. To be able to get in some of these ideas. But you can play through the game in your own time as such for the details. The other point is if they do play g3, you can play the move bishop b4 and sort of transpose eventually back to the line I recommended. Like white can of course try some different moves, but h6 is always going to be a somewhat useful move for black, so not really sacrificing too much in terms of the objective quality. But yeah, it's a bit of a detailed answer to the question. Obviously, the file kind of goes a lot deeper and covers the gaps, but hopefully that gives you a nice system to play against a Catalan that you can play with confidence in your own games, just so by knowing the middle game plans, as it were. With this, I'm going to now move into the game analysis part. I analyze your students' games, give feedback. I'm going to use my game as the example. Just let me sort something out just quickly. So I was just setting up Layla 0, but actually I'm using Layla on a very powerful engine on Chessify, basically for this cloud engine analysis. So that means you're not just going to get like that really good understanding like from a human level, which is why I kind of like to use Chessbase now more than Lichess for the actual lesson, even though the link is of course in a Lichess format for you guys. But I just find it allows you that deeper analysis because the Sockfish engine is a bit superficial and a bit like of a weak sort of power in the just Lichess study. So basically, yeah, this is a game I play against Sergei Shipov, rate 2592 FIDE at the time of this game in the Citashel Open. And actually, this is my first time ever playing knight to a6. Previously, I was playing move knight g4, but I kind of decided, okay, let's play something a little bit different because I knew that I really was having very bad results in the knight c6 lines in the Mar del Plata, like just losing virtually every game as black. So I said, let's play something a little bit different this time. And I didn't know all the finer points of the theory, but as it turned out, he kind of played a little bit differently anyway. But okay, I'm going to sort of skip past some of the theory. Like, yeah, there are different, moves that the engines kind of say are a bit better for white here. But the idea was just trying to get sort of just some more strategic position where I could just have some clear ideas. And yeah, when he goes knight d2, that's admittedly not the most critical move, kind of for the reason I played that this position is objectively going to be quite okay for black. But okay, I've sort of been talking a lot so far. I do want to give you a chance to think about a lot of these positions as puzzles yourself, because ultimately the maximum learning is going to come from, the effort that you put in, of course. So, like, what you put in is kind of what you get out in a sense. But what would be your move as black in this position? And as usual for this, like, because it's going to be a recorded video here rather than, a live session, on a Zoom call, and what we're going to do is, if you need more time to think about it, and I do recommend you do think about it a bit more deeply in general, that you just pause the video and then just resume it when you are back. And then we can kind of compare like your thought process with, with the best continuation and, why I did in the game and so forth. So basically for this position here, what we kind of notice is that black's main idea in these 96 systems is essentially to try to get the knight to d4. And, well, at this point, basically what I didn't realize in the game was that I didn't really think in terms of what is the worst placed piece. I thought, okay, I should just develop my pieces normally and just develop the piece automatically. But both bishop e6 and rook d8 are just mistakes here. Because what happens is if white just plays a move like f3, for example, my knight here is just very stuck. And the game kind of shows why this is a big deal that the knight is sort of stuck on a6. Now, to be fair, maybe I could still play c6 and maybe the position's still not that terrible. But still, we can kind of see how my bishop doesn't really belong on c6. It's the knight that belongs on e6 to use the d4 outpost. But I thought I could go this way and try to get the knight instead, and it was only when he played knight d5 that I realized that this is an absolutely horrible position for black. We're never getting in knight d4. We can't kick away their knight because our knight's in the way. So I just completely chose the wrong plan and end up with a losing position on move 19 as a result. Now, my opponent did make some more mistakes and kind of let me back in the game before I kind of choked in some time trouble later. But this was sort of the moment I really wanted to focus on for this game, and it's also not the first time I actually have used this game in a lesson with students, but what I should do here is I should really just play to move knight to c5. Now, to be fair, you could start with c6. Like, I'll give you partial credit for this is an alternative, but you'll kind of notice that knight c5 is a lot more efficient, as our knight just gets to e6 more quickly, and the move c5 is like maybe 6 is a little bit less integral, because knight d5 we have c6 anyway. I do think this is a position where actually, if anything, it's probably black who is the one who's fighting for an advantage already, due to my opponent's not very good opening play as such. Well, certainly by Grandmaster standards. Like if they go c5, yeah, you don't even have to play c6 and potentially give him the outpost for the knights, but you can sort of see, yeah, a little bit the difference in this version, and we just got like everything we could really want when we play the knight a6 version as black. And you can certainly use these ideas if it's allows you to potentially outplay nearly 2600 GM, even one out of form, then certainly has a good chance of working into players, say, 2200, 2300, you might be facing a lot in your own games. But yeah, that was just sort of an example, like just improving the worst place piece. It's a concept that is so obvious and automatic when it's mentioned, but if it's not that level of unconscious competence, you may miss some opportunities to sort of do this in the game. So just one of these little strategic things that can really make the difference when your games between ending up in sort of a bad position with bad pieces and having that kind of modern philosophy I've developed of no bad pawns, no bad pieces, which if you apply this consistently, you could probably have a fairly easy small increase in rating just by adopting the no bad pawns, no bad pieces philosophy. Also, just a little bit of a heads up, like with in an actual like sort of private lesson, sometimes I will go a lot deeper into a game. Like I'm kind of taking an approach here of what's kind of taking the key one or two positions from each game, just so we can kind of have a little bit of a wider spread of information, just give you a bit of a better feel for the way in which I kind of like to cover too, like in how I select the exact examples. But yeah, in actual lesson, I might go a lot more deeply depending on the situation. Because I'm using my own games, that's why I'm focusing a little bit more on, yeah, just some really key positions. And this game I play against Neil Wright. Basically, this line with the barrier attack with this 95 and this attack was something that really gave me a lot of headaches as a junior. I wasn't really sure how to defend against this sort of attack, and at the time the engines weren't really strong enough to really understand these kind of close positions so deeply. Of course, I understand now the engines are really strong and you can like put in a line that'll give you the solution. But rather than kind of going through this game, like this is a game where I kind of played this a6 move because I was just so paranoid about the attack on the king that I was willing to kind of go into a worse version of Castle's Line just to avoid it. Like there's a level of my paranoia at the time of this game. But it turns out that if they do go for this attack, Black actually does get an advantage, and I kind of show with this very nice game, Mechatarian, Gabrielian in the study, like in a notes this game. Black just gets a very strong attack. I mean, to be fair, like Knight B4 actually is even better than the move of Rook C8 that Gabrielian played in the game. It's kind of funny, like every time I see Gabrielian, I think of him as like one of the very first players who managed to get from like 2,200 to nearly 2,500 FIDE in like 18 months just using the Learn Chess King resources. And okay, this is something that maybe ties a little bit more into the training plan, but I found that the resources that really helped me to improve my chess skills most in general were these resources from the Soviet School of Chess from Chess King. So the website just learn.chessing.com. And it's something I recommend to all my private students just to solve some puzzles there each day, and you're going to notice the difference in your calculation, tactical skills, and of course your chess understanding. But yeah, that's something you can look at these games in your own time, and that will fill this gap of how to deal with this approach that, yeah, the engines hate it, but over the board it can feel a bit awkward to deal with the attack, so this will just allow you to be ready for that. Also, the game I play against Bob Smith. This time I was rated 2006 FIDE, though it's true that this is kind of like my breakthrough tournament, 2017 International Open. If you follow my Facebook, you'll kind of know that I did a recent tribute on Brian Jones, who passed away just last month. He was around running the Senior National Open, and okay, enough talk of his story. Let's actually look at the position though. So here, what do you think is the move that White should play in this position? And by the way, at this time, Bob Smith was rated 2294 FIDE, so outrated me by only 300 points. But actually, I was the one kind of outplaying him at this game, and okay, end up losing eventually in a very painful way, because I actually was completely winning it at one point that I just completely missed in the time trouble. But okay, what's your move as White in this position? Pause it if you need more time. So here in the game, I played the move of bishop to c1, which does still keep a nice advantage. Like I think that having the idea of trying to get the bishop more active is on the right track. But I basically had missed a very nice trick, and I did have lots of time on the clock. Like my opponent was actually the one who was starting to get in time trouble around this point, and I didn't notice actually when I was thinking about that this was one of my big weaknesses actually in chess, like for many years in my teenage years, is and even maybe in my early adult years as well, is that when my opponents would get into time trouble, I would start to get in my own head basically and start to play a lot worse in the opponent's time pressure. I think it was kind of like this is psychology where I didn't really know whether I should try to play more forcingly to try to like, try out calculate a mistake. Like I just wouldn't really know what to do and I'd sort of like overthink things a lot. And also, I think it kind of stemmed from a time in 2003 where I like had my opponent was like really low on time, like it was rate 800, I was rate 1200, and then I didn't know what to do, so I was just kind of playing as fast as him, and then he was able to kind of outplay me, even though there were like some things that if I had just taken my time, I probably would have won the game. So it's probably like some unresolved like psychological aspects as well, and it's also a reason by why I do think that, especially for neurodivergent people like myself, I think it's very important to talk with a psychologist because the solutions that, and I'm still being here as like a bit of a high performance coach as well because I'm a certified high performance coach. Basically, what I've kind of realized and something I'm kind of working on a little bit now is realizing that the concepts that are designed like to work for, let's say, neurotypical people are not necessarily going to work in the same way for neurodivergent people. Like we kind of figure out our own way to make the tools work for us. And I think that that's something that really kind of helps is to sort of think about, well, sort of where is it that this kind of, this kind of like thing came from, like what sort of like the root cause, not just the symptoms in a sense. And that's something that, yeah, a therapist really can like help so much with that process. It's, not something that I'm qualified like to, to go through with you, but I think having someone else to do it is something I would very much recommend. Like obviously I can offer suggestions based on what's worked for me, try like understand your challenges, but yeah, my expertise is more in the areas of course like the chess coaching and like the actual performance conversation rather working through the past experience that might be holding you back. Like that's more more for a therapist. But anyway, moving on to the position here, I know I talked a little bit on a different topic. That's just how my like ADHD brain kind of works. But yeah, the move Queen D6, I'll give you partial credit if you want to play this move because it does input the queen on a very annoying square. Though it is true, you still have to kind of find the same idea in the next move if you want to make this work. If Black's able, to get in moves like knight c4 or knight d5 and stabilize, it's going to be kind of hard to break that fortress on the light squares. And so you really need to find the move d5. This is the key idea that I don't think I even considered this move in the game, actually. I mean, it was from a long time ago, so I'm not 100% sure. It was like 18 years ago. But I don't think I considered this move at the time. Because I think it's one of these cases where it's like a candidate move situation, right? Like once you see the move, it's just very obvious that, if they play c takes, you go knight takes b5 and you're just up material because, if they do try to play rook b8 and go for the pin, then yeah, you've got like even bishop f6 to, overwhelm the knight, as it were. And if they play bishop d5 instead, yeah, obviously they can't take with the knight because of the mate. And if c d5, then there is a move queen to d6. Yeah, I'm sort of trying to remember actually whether I sort of saw this far and kind of misevaluated the arising position, but yeah, we can kind of see how the power of sort of transforming the position when you're fighting with the queen against several pieces, in this case the knight and the rook. It's going to be very important to not allow the pieces to stabilize, because if the pieces stabilize and are all really well defended, it's just going to be very hard to break through, and your queen's not really going to be so much better than the two pieces as it kind of turned out during the game. But once we're able to transform the position, now black is not really able to coordinate, the knights are stuck defending each other. We've got a very easy plan to play queen a6, which kind of proves that we are going to get the material back here anyway, and once we can kind of pick these pawns off and get a past a pawn, it is going to be technically a winning position. Obviously, it will take some time, but it's kind of a noteworthy point that here we actually may not necessarily be so eager just to double the pawns, because they can kind of put the king on g7, and again, the question remains of how to break through as such. But you could certainly play a move like queen a5 and kind of ask some questions as to how black's going to defend the pawn, because like if you go rook a4, your queen can kind of get in like this, and yeah, you're just going to kind of use the principle of two weaknesses just to kind of overwhelm them in this case. Because the knight's especially a more short range piece, they can't really cover across the whole board very well, as it were. So yeah, it's a bit of a longer explanation. There was one really painful moment later in this game where I think I remember it now. Like I got to this position and I think I just had like some lapse in concentration here or something. Like we're both in great time trouble, but I just for whatever reason didn't see this move bishop h6 just winning knight and winning the game. I mean, to be fair, he had kind of just blundered an equal position as well. Like he played this knight e6. I think I just played this thinking, okay, worst case I can always move back and repeat moves. But yeah, once I think as soon as I played bishop d2, I think I realized I could have played bishop h6, and I just was really like distraught. I just thrown away the win, and as a result, yeah, I just kind of like wasn't really a good mental state, and just like self-destructed and even lost. So yeah, kind of example, yeah, that little bit of like psychology coming into play as well. That just if you're able to kind of keep a clear head, it really makes things so much easier, and that's the power of things like meditation, mindfulness, yoga, these kind of more I mean, there's sort of spiritual practices, but just kind of really, I like thinking in terms of mindset, just getting in the right frame of mind. And again, it's one of the big advantages of the Indian school of chess. They literally, India literally invented yoga, as it were. So it's one of these advantages they have over the competition. And if you do these things, you can have these and little advantages as well. Like it go beyond just the pure chess skill. Okay, so having talked about this game, even though it's a bit painful for me to look back at it, but okay, moving on, it's also true that you can learn from your wins as well as from your losses. Like in this game against Dusan Stojic, who's like very theoretical, like very good theoretical knowledge. But his one weakness is he kind of would sometimes get a little bit of time trouble, basically, and sort of self-destruct a little from there. But he actually played this opening really well. Like he even knew like this rook a3. Like I even prepared a little bit before the game. And he still knew the theory better than me because he was obviously like using Mega Database, knowing the theory well. Whereas I wasn't really. I didn't have Mega Database at this time. Like this tournament was just before I started working with Grandmaster Ian Rogers, and you can sort of feel like that difference in the depth of preparation. So what I've done is I've actually included some model games, like showing, for example, that yeah, Black probably should just play Bishop d3 and just accept that it's going to be equal and probably ending in a draw in some way because yeah, basically my attempt to play for a win in the game just kind of backfired and just left Black a little bit worse, kind of for the reason that Dushan showed in the game. Later on, I was kind of able to swindle him, like one kind of instructive position I want to share. Because again, it kind of relates a little bit to psychology. Like I know that, obviously different the engines can give you the, what is the best move, but obviously like the role of the coach is kind of, sort of fill in the gaps, let's say, that the engine can't cover, like why the move was played, the how to train effectively, some of these little psychological hacks and so forth. And so it's worth noting that in this position, okay, my opponent obviously had realized he was previously winning, and realized he probably had kind of like spoiled it a little bit at this point, but yeah, at this stage he just kind of had lapse in concentration and time trouble, where rather than playing some move like Queen d3, where, okay, white's a little bit better, but probably it should be a draw if black defends precisely and, say, just sits on the position, for example. Because if these pawns get traded, that also kind of brings it closer to a draw as the pawns get exchanged when you're worse. But instead, he played Queen d4, and okay, I don't think I need to set this puzzle. I think the fact that I'm showing and pausing here, you kind of know there's a tactic, and you've seen the move Rook e1, because otherwise black's just dead. But an interesting point is that my opponent didn't have to self-destruct and sort of just be down on Rook and resign. Like, obviously, he's very annoyed about this game. That he was about to, seems, lose to a player 250 points right below him. But actually, if he plays Rook e4, it's kind of, or Rook e1 rather, it's worth noting this is actually going to be a fortress here. That after, say, Queen takes a4, for example, white can just go for, say, g4, Rook e3, and the Rook can't just move back and forth. This isn't really a way to break through. So this was something that my opponent kind of missed a little bit. Like, sort of it's a funny point, actually. You can even play, like, h4 in this position. Well, actually, you kind of have to play h4 is sort of the idea. So it's a little bit difficult, to be fair, but it sort of turns out, yeah, that in this position, as long as you sort of can have the rook on e3 and you sort of don't let the queen kind of get in as it was covered in the Varetsky's endgame manual, then, yeah, it's just going to end up being a draw, funnily enough. So it goes to show, yeah, why you shouldn't, like, sort of, like, just get too distraught. Like, even if you have to, get up from the board or, like, just do, like, a bit of breathing for a few minutes, it just allows you to, just mentally reset and be able to, to get in the right mental state to play again. Like, for example, you can look up box breathing after this session to find a technique that might work for you in that sense. I mean, to be fair, like, what breathing exercise you doesn't really matter as much as just kind of being in a habit of being intentional about your breathing, kind of using your body to sort of, like, slow down, like, your heart rate and, get in that right state. with that bit slower breathing, as it were. Okay, but that was sort of this game, just a little example I sort of wanted to share. And I mean, there are a lot of other things, like there are so many things I want to share with my games, but it's also true there are some other things also kind of want to get to in the session as well. But I'll mention a final point that I want to share. Basically, something I kind of noticed is I was really struggling a lot against in the Kings in a lot of different lines. Like in this game against Igor Bielobrook, who okay, at the time he's like 400 points higher rated than me, so it's not really a surprise that he ended up just outplaying me in a very convincing way. Like for example, like I kind of knew what the early middle game plan was, but I hadn't really played for a lot of model games from Black's point of view. And so I didn't really understand the subtleties of when you should play the move of f5. Like it turns out that you should play the move of queen to e7, and that way if knight d2, f5 can sort of come at some point. Actually, even here it's probably a bit too early because there are these little tricks that you do have to watch out for here. So this is I'm going for a little bit more quickly because I do have to get to the other things as well. But this is just an example of sort of some of the subtleties that this is the way to kind of really understand the position is like not just to say, just look at what the top engine line is, but kind of try to understand why the other moves don't work as well. So we know that we need to play queen e7 and knight d7 and only then f5, and then we'll be able to go f4 and get that e5 outpost for the knights. Or if they try to stop it, well, we can kind of get our pieces back into play and sort of have a reasonable position. Like just a very normal position, really, for for this opening with the nice active pieces. Again, no bad pawns, no bad pieces. Well, maybe d6 is a bad pawn, but it's a bit hard for white to get it when the center is so open. But the game kind of shows why the immediate f5 just isn't going to be as good. After f5, I probably should have taken with the bishop, even if white's still going to have some initiative there. But this is still preferable to like the game where my opponent. I mean, even though bishop f4 is kind of a mistake, like knight b5 and then bishop f4 would be just really, really strong. Still, the game kind of demonstrates all the problem that the black face here. And okay, obviously I didn't play this very well either, but this sort of game is like a very good model from white's point of view. Just black has no counterplay, like we can't get an f5, b5. These pawns are all really weak around the king. And my attempts to try to defend passively, like, just don't really work. Like, he was able to trade the queens, get a completely winning endgame where even with like a few small inaccuracies, white, still was able to win. Like, he found a nice little trick here of rook e7, and then I had to resign at this point. Okay, I guess with this I'm kind of showing it more in the Ian Rogers kind of style, like go through one game quickly. But these games like this, it seems like this are kind of maybe sort of understand two things. Like if I was, advising myself from, from like back then, like in 2007, I'd probably say you need to like get mega database and like just play through lots of model games to understand the arising middle games. And two, I'd probably say, well, I don't know if the King's Indian is necessarily the opening that suits your style the best. Maybe there are some others might suit you better, and we can talk about that at the end of the lesson. So basically, but I do want to also share this one example. Like I know it's going to go a little bit over like for this section, but I do want to also share like one personal experience of mine just to show you the difference before I got coaching from a Grandmaster Ian Rogers, and then after I had that like first one or two lessons. So because in the Oceanias, I was like kind of quite sick, like I had food poisoning for like the second half of that event, so I wasn't really able to show my full strength in this tournament, let's say, just by getting some good positions sometimes. But this game against George, yeah, I think is a really nice example. And this is actually an unpublished game that I am sharing with you here, like it's not in the databases, but it was this game in the big boards that I think actually Ian ended up putting it in his chess column, actually. Like the first time one of my wins got published, they were almost always publishing my losses in the past. Actually, that's not true. I did have one win of mine published in 2006 New South Union Championship, but okay, I digress a bit. So after d takes e5, like basically, I knew that George kind of liked to play this line because I sort of checked his games in the database, and it was okay. He likes to play this kind of system. And okay, back then, the move f6 and bishop g4, yeah, these are sort of solutions for black that, can be played as well. But I was sort of using this book, like, of playing against the anti-Sicilians, like Anti-Sicilians, a guide for black by Dorian Rogozenko. Got Rogozenko being like a really great, theoretician for the openings, especially if like Sicilians is black. In fact, it was his book, the Sveshnikov Reloaded, that was kind of like my go-to Bible for how to play the Sveshnikov with the black pieces. But yeah, after takes and e6. So the thing to know about like George, and something I kind of only started to really appreciate kind of with this game. And maybe Ian might have told me something that kind of gave me the idea, because obviously he had played George a lot in the tournaments this time. But I kind of realized that I sort of don't have to go crazy or like try to attack against George. I can just play very, very solidly. I can't let him sort of overcomplicate and kind of make the mistakes. And that's sort of what happened, because rather than playing something like 95 and, just playing into something like this where white is going to have some, some quite good compensation for the pawn. Obviously, I had done my preparation. I knew that, this sort of position would be, would be technically okay for black. They could sort of kick back the knight and, try to consolidate to some extent. But to be fair, I think if George had played, I think he's still a pretty decent chance he would outplay me, because he was a stronger player than me at the time of this game. This is kind of the approach I was sort of going for, in case you want to explore the details yourself after the lesson. Because the injured free does go a lot deeper, but this is the main line in a sense. But instead, he tried to sort of trick me with bishop g5. Okay, if I just play in Morphy style and just throw the kitchen sink of the king, then he's probably going to collapse like in every other game that I played against Max before. Now, it's true that I probably should just play to move f6, and I would, I think, have probably a winning position, actually, if I find this little trick. This one, by the way, does make a good puzzle. Like, if you do want to pause the video, this is a good moment to see if you can find a thing that me and my opponent missed. Obviously, it's a little bit difficult without the computer to help. But the answer is that actually the move of Queen d6 is going to be really strong in this position, with the idea that either we take the pawn and we're just much better, or, if knight b5, we go queen b4 and we're able to, trade off the queens and basically defend in this sort of way. Like, it's a bit of a complex variation, but the gist is that if they do try out all these sort of tactics, like going into this sort of George, very tactical variation, the problem is that even though the material is going to be equal after they take, the knight's kind of stuck. We've got the bishops raking the board, and it's just going to be technically a winning position for black in with best play. So that's kind of the refutation. Admittedly, I wasn't really working so much with engines at the time of this game. Like I said, I've had like a healthy skepticism for engine analysis at that time. So I said, okay, let's just play solidly. Let's just play bishop e7, and he's going to have to simplify in some way. But then he plays this move of rook d1, and I'm thinking, okay, this move probably shouldn't be very good somehow. But I also felt that the lines with e d5, I felt they were a little bit complex. I wasn't quite sure if my king was really going to be safe here. Okay, to be fair, I also just completely overlooked that in this position, that like after knight b6, I didn't see that I have this sort of queen c6 move to, kind of fend off the attack and be a pawn up, as was played in an Okotnik against Ikonikov game. That's one you can check out after lesson if you want to. And yeah, I also probably didn't realize that after knight g5, I don't have to go into this stuff, but I can just sort of like take and just be up a piece. Like I probably, saw some ghosts, like maybe I missed like knight f7, queen a5, or something like this is probably what I overlooked in the game, to be fair. But I sort of took the practical decision of saying, okay, I know that if I play bishop g5, that in the worst case scenario, and like I was really in love with the worst case method around this time, where you basically say, okay, in the worst case I can play this move and I'm safe. And I realized that in this arising position that comes from here, yeah, my king is a little bit awkward on f8, but I have this little bit of a trick of bishop f5, where I can force the trade of queens, and again, to an ending where I'm probably not going to lose, let's say. Now, it's sort of interesting to note that actually the move of castles or 96 and castles, actually does give white quite decent compensation for the pawn, because there are ways to try, like, open it up, as it were. Though, again, I can still, in the worst case, play g6 and sort of, trade off the queens or, like, give back the pawn, and, I'm still going to be okay here, in a sense. So yeah, basically that was kind of my idea. Capablanca style, give back the pawn, just get a solid position, and kind of let my opponent kind of overthink a bit. And that's kind of what happened, because already at this point I noticed that I think my opponent he'd been spending a lot of time, like, just trying to sort of complicate the position, like, trying to find some way to trick me, and what kind of happened was that he tricked himself, because, I mean, yeah, also I was lateral rated, like, if he had, just played solely, I might have, just sort of kick the knight away, maybe trade, and just make a solid draw. Like, that would be a very good result for me in this time. But instead he was trying to win at any cost, and he played the move knight b5, trying to make some tactics happen, and, well, okay, what do you think would be a good move for black in this position here? So take your time on it, figure out the details, but yeah, what would be your continuation with black to play? So it's quite clear that my opponent kind of miscalculated something. Like, obviously a player of the tactical strength of George obviously saw that move bishop d3 as a candidate, but clearly he just missed something in the variations, and I think he might have missed the move of king f6 maybe. I think he just assumed that the king would just be in too much danger, but I kind of thought like very concretely and realized that actually, if he goes knight e4, I just take because of the back rank made in a sense. And after his move knight d6 in the game, trying to sort of turn things around, well, I just play rook d6, and I'm just able to have two extra pieces for a rook. Admittedly, yeah, the move king f5, like the Indian thinks king e5 first is better to kick the rook away and then go king f5, but to be fair, the difference is not the most massive in this case. Like, okay, he does have this little trick of a4 and this sort of thing, which he could have used to try to save the game, but yeah, in the end, he didn't really see it, and once I was sort of able to stabilize the position, I was just able to basically consolidate two-minor piece for a rook, and I was able to win pretty convincingly from this stage. Like I was throwing knight c8 to force the rooks back, so there's no way for him to use his temporary initiative. You can play for the rest of the game in your own time, like in the file if you're so inclined, but I did want to share this example just kind of show a little bit of the before or after. Like, before I was kind of getting the really good positions against the higher rated players, like even like 250, 300. But then I was sort of like making some mistakes, like my psychology was getting in the way and like sort of getting the better of me. Whereas having that one lesson, even those two lessons with Ian, like that just gave me a lot of confidence. Like, okay, like I'm learning from a grandmaster now, like it's sort of natural to get that bit of a confidence boost, which is sometimes the case where you might experience improvement even if you're working with a coach that's not a great fit, just because it gives you a lot more confidence. That can sometimes happen in the short term. But it's also true, yeah, the confidence also can come from objective factors like, okay, like I'm actually kind of seeing things that are not so obvious, or like, oh, that's like a good question I asked. Like it gives confidence to get that kind of validation. And like, especially for neurodivergent people, like having that sort of encouragement, that support, that validation, recognition, like it's so important because it's so easy to either, get in our own heads or, have other people's mind chatter, like kind of like get in our head and we like want to try and get it out and it's not so easy. Like that happened to me so much, and having that, so I could sort of talk to openly and like get that sort of feedback on my thoughts and like the questions and ideas, just so valuable. Like it's why I'm like so grateful, to Ian for helping me with this type of chess journey, because I think it would have been very very hard for me to become a grandmaster, with that situation I was in, without like any other real support so easily, without Ian's help, of course. And of course, all the other coaches I work with, obviously very grateful to them for helping me on those different stages of chess, like up to 2,000 plus feet, like that also was really, really invaluable. So, with that being said, I'm going to kind of move on a little bit. There were a few other examples I like. There was this really cool trap I had, like, caught Igor Bielabrick with. I kind of went for, like, losing against him all the time to actually beating him. Like, that was what I wanted to share, but I kind of, like, don't have time in 1 hour. But you'll see it in the file, so it's all well and good. Yeah, there's kind of only going to be really time to kind of cover, like, one of these two things properly, but I'll sort of give a little bit of a teaser of kind of what I had sort of prepared. Basically, I kind of noticed when looking at the games from the Sinkfield Cup tiebreak, there are actually some really interesting games from these tournaments, like from the free games. Like even the draw between So and Caruana was also very interesting, actually. But okay, that game was. I ended up just focusing on the wins, just usually a bit more interesting. But this game, there was like a moment that came up a bit later on. Like I'll play for the opening moves just to sort of get a feel for kind of the positions. It's yeah, kind of interesting as well to see like Prague just going back to the old main line and not going for some of these like trendy approaches, like trying to put the pawn on a4 or trying to sort of do without the bishop retreat. It's like, okay, let's just play an old main line and just get a game of chess. Still valid to this day. Like systems like this are always going to be relevant from White's point of view, just like the Royal Pairs, Catalan, this sort of thing. But yeah, after some more moves, if I had more time, I'd probably talk a lot about this position. I mean, I don't really have time to do full justice to it, but I would still recommend that you should hear and think about what you would play in this position as White to see if you can improve on Prague's play in the game. Because Prague really didn't play the best move. Okay, it was like a blitz time control, so perhaps he can be forgiven a bit for that. But, if you have the time to think about it, obviously you should do so to get the most out of this lesson here. But I think if you play any of like Rook B1, Bishop E3 or Rook E2, I think White is going to have a significant advantage. I kind of like Rook B1 best just to have the open file, but honestly Bishop E3 is going to be totally fine as well here, even if it does mean that after Bishop A5 the bishop probably does have to go back again, so that might be the reason why you might prefer to play Rook A1, just to be that little bit more accurate, but okay, it's a minor point. The problem with bishop takes a4, which is like a question a few of you had, is black has this knight d4 trick. That's a very typical trick. Like any e4, e5 player really should know this trick, actually, of going and hitting the bishop. Because it sometimes comes up in like the d3, d6 row of the Pez lines as well. But yeah, this position here is actually quite good for black. Again, I don't really have time to go into the details, but basically d5 ends up being a really nice way to kind of open up the position. Like you have some moves even like knight e4 that can be a typical tactic. Though in this version, probably knight d7 and keeping it simple is probably going to be the best. But yeah, you can explore it after the lesson, as it were, and see the details for yourself. But basically, the position I kind of wanted to set as a puzzle was, well, there's kind of a difficult one and a not so difficult one. And again, it's true that with the only having 1 hour, like normally, to give you a heads up, like when I'm working with students rate 2000 plus FIDE, I normally prefer to do like 2 hour lessons like each time if possible. Just because I find like 1 hour is really not enough to kind of fully do justice to all the things I think are important to cover in the lesson when we're sort of talking like high level analysis, questions, explanations, and so forth. So that's why, yeah, this one definitely has more about maybe that sample kind of feel. But still, I think this position does make a really good exercise, and I would encourage you to pause the video here and think about what you would play in your own time. And then after we've done this lesson, you can check this game between Prague against Caruana. I think it's like around game 20 or so in the file, somewhere around there. Basically, yeah, you'll be able to kind of compare like your thought process with how the game went and how black should have played it. But what I can say though is that the move f4 was a mistake by Caruana because it turns out it leads to some tactical problems. Obviously, he was wanting to try to stabilize, have the extra pawn, and switch the attack on the white king. But the move of, well, okay, it turns out actually rook ed1 is actually stronger than rook a to d1 here for some tactical reasons. But rook ed1 is what was played in the game, and again, if you want to, like, it turns out that actually this position though is actually going to be winning for white. Yeah, this thing with like Layla, like sometimes Layla takes a while to figure out what's going on. So actually, I do stand corrected. Like rook 81 is actually the best move when you go a lot deeper into the stockfish analysis. And there's another reason why I like to use the live book, with these sessions, because it means that we can like have a more accurate analysis when we can sort of see like people are very analyzed position at very high depth rather than just relying on the low depth analysis stock and saying, oh, actually stockfish fought longer, and it turns out this is the case instead. Well, we're doing it this way, with like the live book, we just get right to the truth. Now, it turns out after rook e6, well, technically there's kind of several solutions here, but let me give it to you anyway. What would be your move as white in this position? Okay, so at this point, there's kind of a few different solutions, like I said, but basically the very best continuation, which actually is even better than the move that Prague played here, is a move of rook takes d7. And the trick is that after it takes queen to g4, of course we're threatening mate, and of course we have the pin, but the crux is that after rook g8, we can just play this move of knight f6 and just win the queen using the pin, as it were. And flicking in f5 doesn't really help either, because white can just take, and you still have knight f6 anyway. Like there's just no escape for black from this position. So that would have been an immediate knockout. Like in the game, they sort of, Prague went for kind of a different version of the same tactic, which, yeah, to be fair, is still completely winning. Like just to show the rest of the game, because it is important to work on your technique of converting winning advantages. It's something that everyone struggles with, so don't feel too bad if you have a bit of a hard time converting a winning position against some 2-100, 2-2 players currently. As you saw, I struggled with it as well in this SIO 2007, but then I learned how to do it from my own experience and from the really great coaching that I received, which now I can then pass on to you and pay it forward. But yeah, at this point, black just resigned because of the obvious inevitable mate that's incoming. So that was a game between Prague and Caruana. Also, the game between So against Caruana was actually very interesting as well. And I will admit, I'm skipping through a lot of examples I would love to cover in an ideal setting, but okay, that's what the file is for, to kind of fill in the gaps, the things that I just can't cover in 1 hour. At least this file gives you the gaps in it. And something I haven't really talked about much with students, but I think it's actually worth pointing out this also does give you a lot of really high quality training material to work through, because I think that what a lot of students are really looking for out of coaching is not just like, information, because sometimes like we have too much information, we don't know what to do with it, but also kind of just that direction, like that training plan, like, okay, what should I be working on? Like, how exactly should I be working on it? That's kind of where I also really want to fill in the gap, and I think that by going through these games like each week, it'll give you just that really good, really just really allowed to improve your understanding, and by solving the puzzles, really improve your calculation. Because in the file, you will notice that I actually have marked some puzzles like with the hashtag symbol for the diagram. So if you just even solve all of the hashtags, like that gives you a lot of really good training material. Like, also, I think most of my students don't even get through all the material each week of all the homework. Like, it's not a case of like, okay, it's homework, you have to do all of it before next session. But it's more a case of, okay, this is something I think will help you, and you can either go for it yourself, to kind of just follow my lead, or you can, do your own path and find your own way. Like, I definitely think that it's not really responsible to coach like to have all of the solutions, but really when you take like coaching at the higher levels, it's about also helping the student to kind of figure out the right solutions for themselves. Like that's kind of really where the high level, like elite kind of coaching starts to happen in a sense. Again, a little tidbit I learned from my many years learning about high performance coaching. So anyway, there is also a really nice example. Also, something I've started to do a bit more lately is that I kind of like to sort of give like puzzles that not always like just say, okay, this is the only move like in a critical position to keep an advantage, which is sort of the more obvious kind of puzzles you'll find in, say, tactics and calculations books. But I do like to also sometimes share some positions where maybe from the computer point of view, there are going to be a lot of reasonable moves here. Also, actually, I do want to take this game from the beginning, because actually I do want to point out that this idea of 97 is actually a very interesting one to get sort of this very dynamic play, and it's one you might want to consider adding to your repertoire if you struggle against the bishop g5 systems. Of course, you can avoid them altogether with h6 like Hikaru and Carlson like to sometimes. But okay, that also has its own subtleties that need to be studied, of course. But yeah, this idea is actually quite an interesting one I would be happy to suggest you can consider adding to your own repertoire. But I think that this position here is a very instructive one, because the move that Prague played game looks very natural, but I think it's actually a little bit of a mistake. Actually, let me flip the board. It's probably a little bit easier for you to think about if you're looking at it from the other side. Obviously, a very unique kind of position, with these sort of chunky pawn center and different imbalances. But okay, what would be your continuation as black in this position here? Okay, so hopefully you didn't just like just come up and move quickly, because I do have like one student who, I'm not going to say their name, but like they sort of will often chess moves very quickly, because like very intuitive players, like just that's the way to kind of like very very fast. But something to kind of understand if you are someone like that, and I definitely have been like that a lot myself in the past as well. Playing very system one based thinking. So basically, Daniel Kahneman wrote this book, Thinking Fast and Slow, which really distinguishes between the system one thinking and the system two thinking. Just to elucidate what that's about, basically, system one thinking is like the very automatic, like what immediately kind of springs to mind. It's like very kind of intuitive in chess terms. Whereas system two is like a much more deliberate, more slower paced kind of thinking, where, say, for example, if I like give you a question of, okay, what is, 5,827 multiplied by, 1,983? Like, unless, you've like, practiced like a lot with numbers, like to be like a super number cruncher, you're not going to like snap the answer immediately. Like, you're going to have to process and like work through it, and think about like, to try to guess the answer to such a question would be like almost a little bit ludicrous in a way. So basically, like, kind of, this is sort of the idea. Like with chess, there are some positions which need system two thinking, and there are some where you can just rely on your intuition, the system one, and find a good move. And that's definitely a skill in itself, be able to differentiate those more critical positions from the ones where you can more just trust your feeling. And that's obviously something I talk about a lot in the lessons as well, in that sense. Because this one might not look like a critical position, but I think it actually is quite a critical position. Because in the game, Prague played just like, obviously, it was a blitz game, so you had to play more on intuition in a sense. But he kind of just played this move, King C8, just sort of playing very like automatically, like, okay, I can sort of take my time and build up the position. But what the game kind of demonstrated is that having this rook on A8, and I made this point actually when watching the game live on Lichess, I made the point, this rook on A8 being stuck in the game is really a big long-term problem. And if you're sort of thinking, okay, how do I outplay sort of like players who say take good players but maybe not great players, that's often the way to do it, is by sort of making use of the long-term factors. Something I remember I picked up from Petronius's battle manual, for example, is the idea that like of all the different types of advantage you can have to outplay a lower rated player, the easiest one to outplay him from is when you have a space advantage. Like even easier maybe than having a small material advantage. Material advantage, or maybe have an attack, maybe you can try and make it messy. But with a space advantage, it's like a very stable advantage where it's just hard to maneuver and you kind of just outmaneuver them more easily because they're just so cramped. And okay, it doesn't maybe apply as much in this position per se, and the rest of the game. It is very instructive, and I would suggest that this position actually does make a good position for you to think about, like not just the next move, but also like kind of what your follow up would be here. That's one I definitely would encourage you to pause and kind of compare your thought process with what So played in the game, because So showed a very instructive idea, which obviously if I said what the idea was, it kind of give away the solution. But you're going to know it when you see it based on the game, and it's why I would encourage you to, just like at least make that kind of mental note of it, something that can win you some games, and just like a really good defensive technique that you're not always going to see covered in traditional chess resources. But in any case, for this position here, going back to the original puzzle, I think it's imperative that Black plays a move like Knight to F4 or Queen J. Like it's going to transpose, to be fair, but the idea is basically realizing that, well, okay, White's not really threatening to play Queen B7 because our threats are actually going to be a lot stronger with like Knight H3, and once we're opening up the king side, it's obviously very, very nice for us, of course. But I'd say White defends a little bit better, and they play some move like Knight to E3 and Queen G8 and King H1. Well, you can kind of see the difference a little bit here, that our attack is a little bit faster. We got the Queen to here in one move instead of two. Meaning that even if you do play a move like King C8, it's kind of not as bad compared to the game. Because you also have moves like A5, where you can sort of try to stabilize it. It's very computerish, but actually even an idea like this might not be completely ridiculous. But okay, probably after Bishop B6 it might be more the idea to maybe move the king and go this way. Maybe that's a bit more efficient, but okay, it's something you can explore certainly outside of the lesson. The point is, of course, that Black is basically doing fine in this position, whereas in a game it was kind of not so fine. Also, it turns you can even just play Queen G6, which is probably even a better option, where you're sort of saying that their queen is going to be actually going to get kind of trapped, like they can't take the pawn, because then the queen gets trapped like this. So that's also a little bit of a trick up your sleeve as well, which kind of buys you the time to maybe able to like bring the rook around, play King C8 if needed. Okay, to be fair, for rook G8, maybe then they can take B7, but still the point remains that it's still going to be like a much better version of the game where you do have ways to kind of eventually get the rook into play, or kind of use the fact that White also is not fully coordinated to kind of fight for the initiative in a very nice way. If White doesn't make that little concession of DC5, well then F5 is going to be a lot worse for them in a sense. So anyway, it's an interesting game. It's one that you could definitely analyze in your own time, and I think you would get a lot out of it. But those are just some of the immediate thoughts I kind of wanted to share. And like I said, I think this puzzle, really great one for you to think about in your own time. And it'll allow you to get even more lessons out of the game compared to what we saw just here. Now, there was another aspect I also prepared, which, okay, admittedly we don't really have time to get to. It'd be more a topic for a subsequent lesson. But basically, I think that there are certain model players that you can study, and that by studying these players' games, you're just going to have a really good feel for how to outplay players of a certain rating. I think of players such as the late Alexander Vojkovic, who actually won a very large number of US Opens around 96 to 2006, around that time. Maybe 1998 to 2006, but I did include a bunch of Black wins, like kind of showing how he just sort of get a position to play, kind of just very like schematic, give the opponent like some sort of like strategic problems to deal with, and then just kind of outplay him on technique in a certain sense. Like to give this game as just one example, he played against Nielsen in Ostend Open 1990, so before he came to the US. And another good player as well, I think, is a really great model for amateur players to follow, like how to kind of consistently beat players below a certain rating. I also really like the games of Sergei Tivyakov, and Tivyakov really has a little bit of a different approach to Vojkovic, but there are also a lot of similarities. Like if you look at, for example, try to think like what's a good example, but say if I even pick a game like this, let's say, you'll kind of see like he's not really trying to sort of play a mainline opening, but he's more playing to just get a middle game he knows well. Like something you'll notice with Tivyakov and also to a lesser extent Vojkovic is they just don't really care about the engine evaluations. They're saying, okay, we've got a standard position to play, like standard Scandinavian or Caracan kind of structure. And I'm just going to like play solidly, like know what my next 20 or so moves are going to be, and just outplay on technique in the middle game. And that's why I point out actually that this position here is one that does actually make potentially a decent puzzle, because I don't think that Tivyakov's move of Rook D8 was necessarily the most precise, so you might find it to be a an interesting exercise to try to come up with a little bit of a better approach compared to the game, as again a way to learn beyond just just looking at automatic engine analysis. And you might also like to consider what might be a better move for white in the game than the move bishop d2. Again, just that way by sort of actually thinking about position itself from a human point of view. It's just going to understand a lot better when you kind of, look at the notes and how the game played out later. It's just a way to really kind of accelerate that sort of learning compared to, say, just playing through games or just solving puzzles, as it were. Also, as a little bit of a bonus near the end, I also included 4 very nice games by Hikaru Nakamura. For example, this sub of this and h5, h4 is also one he's had used quite successfully just to outplay players below 2-400, 2-500 quite consistently. It's kind of a little bit of a Hikaru specialty, a bit of a more unorthodox way to kind of exploit the opponent's weaknesses, but it worked very well in this game against Ralph Tanray, 2-2-2-4 FIDE. Also, this position here is another one that also makes a really nice puzzle. Actually, there was even a puzzle a little bit earlier I also probably should have set, kind of it gave away the answer a little bit by picking the Lyle puzzle first. But, if you sort of see the way that Hikaru played, if you're playing against a tactical player, like someone who plays King's Indian and wants to attack, this game by Hikaru against Mark Schillingkamp is just a really great example of how to neutralize such a player. And also, yeah, just kind of these other games against Nick Mata. Also, that was one that's very complicated. This position makes a really interesting exercise from Black's point of view. Obviously a tough one given that Nick rated 2-2-50 FIDE didn't find the the answer in the game. So obviously that means it's going to be pretty tough, but certainly a very instructive example. But yeah, there's just some homework positions you can kind of go through, and just so when you do kind of go through the file, you'll kind of just get a better understanding myself thinking about some of these positions, kind of seeing how Hikaru kind of outplayed with that queen and knight versus queen and bishop imbalance. This is just really kind of part of the blueprint of how to sort of outplay players below a certain rating in the case of Hikaru's games, and Wojciech Kivikov's is really focused on how to outplay players rated around 2-300 FIDE and below that. And it's obviously something, that with more time we can go into a lot more deeply in the next lesson. But I also want to kind of pass it over to you. Something I kind of say at the end of each lesson, I think this is a really important part of the improvement, is to kind of get you to think about, okay, what are sort of the main things that you got from the lesson? I don't just keep it general, also what are sort of some specific moves that, that kind of made an impression on you from, or games that made an impression on you from today. You might like to pause the video right now and kind of write down what some of those were in order to really get the most out of this sample lesson. And also for the training plan, just to give that little bit of guidance and direction, the advice I would kind of give to myself back from when I was young was basically, I would say, from the psychological point of view, just start doing breathing exercises each day to kind of relax your nervous system, just do those breathing exercises whenever it comes to mind, do them at each move of the chess game, just to kind of keep that good mental and emotional state. And from the chess point of view, I'd probably say, yeah, just to just keep an eye out for the candidate moves, just make sure to look for alternatives so you're not missing something important. And also maybe for the opening point of view, maybe consider playing an opening other than the King's Indian, learning a different system. So you're not just stuck with playing the King's Indian every single time when maybe the positions might not necessarily suit your style all that well. And okay, this time, as I said sort of earlier on, I sort of was already to try learning the Nimzo Indian a little bit, in 2005, 2006. So probably in the next lesson I just would say, okay, I did a file recently on Nimzo Indian, that normally I'd charge people apply $180 plus to, to get. But I'll just give it to you in the next lesson, just to kind of help you out in that sort of way. I really don't hold anything back when it comes to helping my students, but as you'll see from the file as well. But okay, now that you've sort of written down, a few things of moves, I also like to ask, kind of what's a specific sort of thinking technique or some kind of idea, let's say, that really stood out to you as well. This sort of question, they're a little bit adapted from what I learned from the high performance coaching process that I've, that mastered in a sense. But okay, it's sort of kind of just adapting and just applying it for chess. So, feel free to pause the video as well, to let it kind of come to mind, what those thinking techniques are. And something you'll also know is when you go through the file, obviously it's not just going to be a really great reminder of, some of the things we talk about, oh yeah, this is something that came up in the session. That kind of retrieval is a big part of how we master any skill, including chess. But you're also going to be able to build on top of it as well by kind of seeing the additional examples that I've referenced, some other ones, we didn't get to, which are still of a very good quality, of course. And all the games, by the way, are auto-analyzed by the engine, so you are going to get that, not just playing through the games, learning something direct from each game, based on the improvements in the game as well as the actual game continuation. So that's just going to be really powerful. Like, it really reflects the way in which I work on my own chess, and then again, it's just going to really make things a lot easier for you as well. So yeah, that's basically kind of talked about, yeah, the different aspects, like, the file about the sort of, what I would normally cover next lesson if I was like coaching the 40-year-old version of myself. And because it is a little bit of a different format, basically I think with this you have a pretty good idea of how I kind of coach, like what my coaching style is, some of my different philosophies. I think normally, like in the private list, I do like to mention a little bit more kind of about thinking techniques. I just felt like there was so much material to kind of get through. So I talked a little bit less about specific thinking techniques, but it is something I do tend to go into like quite a lot with like students, because when I can sort of see like what the thought process is of someone, it's much easier to suggest like the thinking techniques are going to really help them the most. So that's why it's like a little bit different in style. Like, again, there's always some difference with a recording versus a live, like, personalized session. But at least it's like gives you at least a taste of like what to kind of expect on a very general sort of level. So I will mention as well, like, because I mean, this is going to be like probably just a sort of evergreen kind of content where I'll probably still be using it much later on. But if you are watching us, say around, let's say early September 2025, which is the time I record this, and this time I only am taking like basically 3 more private students, and as you might guess from the time, I'm looking for players who are rated 2000 plus FIDE, but no, not those who just like have that deep love for chess, like that sort of little bit of maybe obsessiveness about chess, like spending a lot of time on it where you can, and yeah, just like really feeling that deep love of the game. Like, that's really what I'm sort of looking for from a student, because I think when you have that, and then when you also have like the right direction and training and resources, you can kind of like fill in the good things will kind of just naturally happen there. You can kind of just trust the process in a sense. So that's what I'm looking for. Like I said, very limited number of students I take, because obviously I wouldn't be able to prepare like in the way in which I prepared like for this recording, for example. Like, I spent like 1.5 hours or more on the file. Like, obviously I can't do that, but if I'm taking a lot of private students at once. And that's also reflecting in the price as well, which again you can reach out to me and I'll let you know what the price is at that time, just in case it changed between when I record this video and when you reach out to me. I'll just say just reach out to me and I'll tell you what the price is. But that sort of explains a little bit like why I do it, because I do factor in the preparation time as well into everything. So yeah, I think that's about all I want to share for the moment in this time frame. For those of you who have made it to the end, yeah, thanks for being here and really showing up and giving your everything to this training. And if you do that for your chess and in the lessons, I'll pay it forward and do the same for you in our lessons as well. So that being said, look forward to hearing from you, and well, I will see you in the next training. Take care.